Hello there, and welcome to Jomon Echoes from Ancient Tohoku. I'm your host Matirog, and I'm so glad you're here. For the next hour or so, I'll be guiding you on a journey through time, back over 10,000 years, to one of the most fascinating and perhaps underappreciated chapters of Japanese history, the Jomon period. This is a solo show, just you and me, and it's specially made for all of you history lovers out there around the world. Today, we'll shine a spotlight on the northeast of Japan, Tohoku, a region that was truly rich, beautiful, and deeply significant during this ancient era. But what exactly was the Jomon period? Why is it suddenly gaining attention from historians and archaeologists across the globe? And what made Tohoku such a special place at the heart of it all? I'd like to answer those questions and more as we gently travel together, imagining what life was like for the people who lived on the land, fished in the rivers, and watched the stars from the forest of Tohoku over 10 millennia ago. Here's how today's episode will flow. First, we'll start with the basics, when and how the Jomon period began, and why it's so important. Then, we'll dive into what made Jomon culture so unique, their incredible pottery, their spiritual worldview, their communal way of life, and their creative approach to food. After that, we'll explore the archaeological discoveries that reveal how they lived, especially in the Tohoku region. We'll look at everyday life through the remains they left behind. Tools, homes, rituals. Then, we'll take a step back and think about the bigger picture. What role did Tohoku play in the Jomon era? Why was it so central to this ancient culture? And finally, we'll talk about the present day, how the Jomon legacy is being recognized, protected, and even reimagined in our modern world. So, are you ready? Let's take our first steps into deep history. Close your eyes for a moment and picture this. The winds blowing through vast forests, the rhythm of waves on a rocky coast, the crackle of a fire in a circular village, and the quiet presence of people who lived in harmony with nature, right here, on the land we now call Tohoku. Let's begin the journey. Alright, before we dive deeper, let's ground ourselves in the basics. The Jomon period refers to a remarkably long span of time in Japan's prehistory, roughly from 15,000 years ago to about 2,400 years ago. That's over 10,000 years of continuous culture. Just think about that for a second. Entire civilizations rose and fell elsewhere in the world, but in Japan, the people of Jomon lived steadily, in harmony with nature, for millennia. The story begins at the end of the last ice age. As the climate warmed rapidly, the landscapes of Japan transformed. Forests of oak, chestnut, and walnut trees began to spread. The rising sea levels and heavy rains deposited rich sediments along the coasts and river valleys, creating ideal habitats for fish, shellfish, and other aquatic life. In response to these environmental changes, Japan's Paleolithic age gave way to the Jomon period. And this shift wasn't just ecological, it was cultural, technological, and spiritual. Now, the name Jomon itself is a uniquely Japanese term. It literally means cord-marked, referring to the rope-like impressions found on much of their pottery. But here's the interesting part. Although the Jomon period is a Japanese historical category, the same span of time looks very different elsewhere. In China, this corresponds roughly to the end of the Paleolithic up to the spring and autumn period. In Europe, it spans from the end of the Ice Age all the way through the Iron Age and even into the time of ancient Rome. That's how long this era lasted. It's astonishing. While the Great Pyramid of Giza was being built in Egypt, people in Japan were already creating elaborate pottery, building homes, and living in settled villages. And that long duration leads to a common misconception. Some people hear pre-agricultural or Stone Age and assume it was a time of stagnation, a primitive era. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Scholars today recognize the Jomon period as a time of advanced technology, sustainable living, and rich spiritual expression. This was not a frozen chapter of history, it was an era of deep innovation and beauty. The Jomon era came before the well-known Yayoi period, which introduced wet rice farming to Japan. But unlike the Yayoi, the Jomon people did not rely on agriculture. And here's what makes it extraordinary. Despite never developing full-scale farming, they lived in permanent settlements not just for a few generations, but for thousands of years. The economy was based on gathering, fishing, and hunting, and they adapted to changing climates, rising and falling sea levels, and shifting landscapes. They created a way of life that was sustainable, deeply connected to the seasons, and resilient in the face of nature's shifts. In fact, some researchers describe the Jomon as one of the world's first sustainable hunter-gatherer societies. That alone makes it globally significant. Now, among all the regions in Japan, one stands out during this era, and that's Tohoku. While Jomon culture existed throughout the Japanese archipelago, northern Tohoku, Aomori, Iwate, and Akita prefectures, and southern Hokkaido are home to an unusually high concentration of well-preserved archaeological sites. In fact, 17 of these sites were collectively registered in 2021 as a UNESCO World Cultural Heritage under the title Jomon Prehistoric Sites in Northern Japan. This designation means that the Jomon culture has now been recognized as possessing outstanding universal value, a heritage for all humankind. But what made this region so special? One major factor was its incredible natural environment. Tohoku is a land of striking landscapes, gentle mountains, rich lowlands, coastal lagoons, rivers brimming with life, and deep forests full of edible nuts and roots. The changing seasons brought an endless cycle of food, chestnuts, acorns, and walnuts from the trees, salmon and trout swimming upstream, shellfish along the rocky coasts, and wild game in the mountains. The forest canopy was largely made up of deciduous broadleaf trees, particularly beech and chestnut. These trees produced edible nuts that were not only nutritious, but could be preserved and stored. The rivers, meanwhile, were fed by abundant rainfall and mountain snowmelt. And just off the coast, the warm and cold ocean currents converged, creating some of the richest fishing grounds on Earth. All of this made Tohoku an ideal environment for long-term settlement. And that's likely why people began living there as early as 15,000 years ago, setting up permanent villages before agriculture even arrived. And here's something especially exciting. Some of the world's oldest known pottery has been discovered in Tohoku, particularly in Aomori Prefecture. These finds suggest that this region could very well be the birthplace of pottery culture. Just imagine it. Early humans kneading clay, shaping it with their hands, firing it in open flames, transforming mud into durable vessels. Pottery allowed people to boil food, remove toxins from plants, store supplies, and expand their diets. They could soften hard nuts, simmer roots, and prepare stews. It was a technological leap that changed how people ate, and perhaps how they thought. And it happened not in Mesopotamia or Egypt, but right here, in the forests of ancient Tohoku. That's something the world is only just beginning to understand. So what did this culture look like? What made it so unique, so beautiful, and so full of meaning? In the next section, we'll take a closer look at the daily lives and spiritual world of the Jomon people. Jomon culture stands apart. In so many ways, it's unlike the prehistoric cultures we see in other parts of the world or in other periods of human history. Its richness, its beauty, and its deep connection with nature, these qualities still speak to us today, thousands of years later, through the artifacts and ruins unearthed from the soil. In this next part of our journey, I'd like to highlight just a few of the most striking aspects of Jomon life and creativity, features that make this culture not only unique, but profoundly human. From pottery that stands with its imagination, to spiritual expressions carved in clay, to the warmth of communal life centered around the rhythm of the seasons, let's take a closer look at the heart of Jomon culture. First and foremost, we have to talk about the pottery. Jomon pottery isn't just one of the oldest in the world, it's also among the most expressive. As we mentioned earlier, the people of the Jomon period began crafting pottery at an astonishingly early stage, long before farming or metal tools appeared. And here's the incredible part. They continued this tradition for over 10,000 years, evolving their techniques, styles, and designs across generations, across regions. In fact, archaeologists can divide the Jomon period into distinct phases simply by studying the changes in their pottery. The name Jomon itself means cord-marked. This refers to the rope-like patterns pressed into the surfaces of their early ceramics. And yet, while this cord pattern is iconic, it's just the beginning of the story. As we travel through time, and especially if we focus on the northern regions like Tohoku and southern Hokkaido, we begin to see just how diverse, inventive, and expressive Jomon pottery truly was. In the earliest days, their vessels were simple, undecorated. But not for long. Soon they were experimenting, pressing shells into the clay, creating raised ridges and swirling lines. Around 10,000 years ago, we begin to see pottery with multiple layers of cold impressions, intricate textures that wrapped around the forms. As the early Jomon period arrived, potters began mixing plant fibers into the clay to make their vessels lighter. They crafted cylindrical pots with flat bottoms, decorated with layered rope motifs. This became known as the lower cylinder style, and it flourished in northeast Japan. And then came the Middle Jomon, the golden age of expression. Imagine this. Vessels with wide flared rims that ripple like waves, dynamic designs made by attaching coiled ropes of clay to the surface, creating patterns so bold they almost seem to move. Some of these pots look like they're on fire, with sculpted flames leaping from their edges. These are sometimes called flame-style pottery, and they're some of the most dramatic ceramics the world has ever seen. In the late Jomon, the pottery became thinner, lighter, more refined. And as we move into the final Jomon, especially in the far north of Tohoku, we encounter the magnificent Kamegaoka-style pottery. These pieces are exquisite, decorated with symmetrical patterns, elegant lines, and careful detail. Compared to the more austere pottery of Western Japan during the same period, the Kamegaoka pots feel almost regal, as if the northern artists had found a language of clay that was all their own. So no, these weren't just cooking pots, they were works of art. In fact, some art historians say that Jomon pottery represents one of the high points of human creativity. If you are listening from overseas, you might be familiar with ancient Greek vases or the delicate ceramics of the Middle East. But here's the amazing thing. The Jomon people were making expressive, technically sophisticated pottery thousands of years earlier, right here on the islands of Japan. When you see a shard of Jomon pottery in a museum, it's easy to imagine the hands that shaped it, the fingers that pressed the rope into the wet clay, the fire that hardened it, and the rituals or daily life that surrounded it. Some say you can still feel the breath of those ancient artists in the curve of the rim or the weight of the base. And I have to agree, this was not just functional, it was deeply intentional. Pottery was their canvas, clay was their voice, and we're still listening 10,000 years later. Next, let's take a closer look at the daily life of the Jomon people, how they lived, and especially how they fed themselves. The Jomon diet was built around three core activities: hunting, fishing, and gathering. But this wasn't just primitive survival. Over thousands of years, their methods became incredibly refined and creative. Let's start with hunting. One of their most important tools? The bow and arrow. This allowed them to hunt from a distance, more safely and more efficiently. They tracked and brought down deer, wild boar, and hares, using obsidian and shale to craft sharp stone arrowheads and spear tips. And here's something remarkable. Obsidian from Hokkaido, far to the north, has been found in sites across Tohoku. That means these ancient people had trade routes and exchange networks that reached hundreds of kilometers. They weren't isolated, they were connected. Now, let's move to the sea. The Jomon people were skilled fishers, and they left behind plenty of evidence to prove it. We found fishing hooks and harpoon tips made from bone and antler, showing they caught not only shellfish, but also large fish, probably by spear and line. There are even signs they used nets, weighted down by round stones called sinkers, carefully polished for the job. And they weren't just fishing from shore. They used dugout canoes, carved from tree trunks, to travel out into deeper waters. From coastal bays to fast-moving rivers, they knew their marine environments well, probably just as well as they knew the forests. Speaking of forests, let's talk about gathering. The woodlands of Tohoku were abundant with edible plants and nuts, and among these, one tree stands out, the chestnut. Chestnuts were high in calories, easy to eat without much processing, and could be dried and stored. In fact, some archaeologists believe the Jomon people may have intentionally grown or managed chestnut groves near their settlements. At a famous site in Aomori, Sanai Maruyama, huge pits were found filled with chestnuts, suggesting they may have cultivated or at least encouraged their growth. Other seasonal foods included walnuts, acorns, wild vegetables, mushrooms, and root crops. Hard nuts were probably ground into flour using stone tools, then shaped into dumplings or cooked into porridge. Imagine their kitchens. The smoky scent of boiling clay pots, the rhythmic scraping of stone grinders, the crackle of a fire, and the quiet bustle of preparing meals from nature's gifts. All of this, tools, knowledge, technique, gave the Jomon people a stable and diverse diet. And as we said earlier, this rich food system allowed them to settle down in permanent communities without farming. Today we talk a lot about sustainability, but the Jomon were living it every day. Their lives were deeply in tune with the natural world. They took only what they needed. They adjusted to the seasons, to changing coastlines, to new challenges. They were resilient. Now, you might be wondering, what did they actually look like? Based on archaeological evidence, Jomon men had an average height of around 157 centimeters. That's a little over 5 feet tall, with women about 10 centimeters shorter. Their bodies were likely strong and muscular, shaped by a life of constant movement and outdoor living. Their facial features? Deep-set eyes, double eyelids, fuller lips, features that some researchers believe are still echoed in certain parts of Japan today. We've found signs of tooth decay, which suggests they ate a lot of starchy nuts and roots. And we've even discovered parasite eggs in their remains, meaning, like us, they had to deal with stomach aches and intestinal troubles from time to time. One fascinating detail: some skeletons show deformation around the ankles, likely caused by frequent squatting. This suggests they often sat in traditional crouched positions, just like people do when sitting around a fire or walking close to the ground. When we imagine all of this, their tools, their meals, their posture, it brings them closer, doesn't it? Suddenly, these aren't just ancient bones or abstract figures. They're people. People who cooked, who traded, who laughed, who healed, who taught their children where to find the best chestnuts, and who lived for thousands of years in a world not so different from ours if we take the time to listen. As we move into the Middle Jomon period and beyond, something remarkable begins to happen. People start forming larger, more permanent settlements, true villages, or as we say in Japanese, mura. In the early days, small communities were scattered across the land. But over time, populations began to concentrate in key areas, giving rise to larger villages that became regional hubs. And once again, it's Tohoku that gives us the clearest window into this transformation. One of the most iconic sites is the Sanai Maruyama site, located in present-day Aomori Prefecture. This was a major settlement that flourished between roughly 5,900 and 4,200 years ago, from the middle to late Jomon period. It wasn't just a temporary camp. It was a thriving community that likely housed several hundred people at its peak. Archaeologists have uncovered more than 200 pit dwellings. These were the typical houses of the time, dug into the earth and covered with wooden or thatched roofs. But perhaps the most breathtaking discovery? A row of 6 massive post holes, each more than 2 meters wide. These supported wooden pillars over 1 meter in diameter, made from huge chestnut trees. What kind of building did they support? We don't know for sure, but some believe it may have been a raised warehouse or perhaps even a tall watchtower, looking out over the village and the surrounding forest. Either way, it tells us something important. The people of Sanai Maruyama were capable of coordinated, large-scale construction, requiring planning, teamwork, and leadership. This was no simple tribe, it was a community. And it wasn't just about housing. These villages had burial areas too. In the early and middle Jomon periods, adults were often buried in rows within the village itself, likely near their homes and family groups. But later, in the late and final Jomon, designated cemeteries appeared, sometimes separated from the residential zones. One deeply moving tradition stands out. The practice of placing a child's remains inside a clay vessel for burial. Imagine a mother cradling her child one last time, gently placing the tiny body inside a handcrafted Jomon pot, something she or her neighbors may have made by hand, and then laying it to rest in the earth. It's these quiet gestures that remind us of the humanity behind the artifacts. These people weren't just surviving, they were loving, grieving, building families. And as villages grew, so did another important dimension of Jomon life: trade and exchange. The more people settled in one place, the more they began exchanging goods, ideas, and materials with neighboring communities, sometimes over surprisingly long distances. For example, jade beads from Niigata have been found in sites across Tohoku. Obsidian tools from Hokkaido have turned up in Aomori and Iwate. These weren't isolated groups. They were part of a wider network, connected by rivers, coasts, and probably by shared festivals or beliefs. And Jomon people didn't just trade tools, they traded beauty. We find ornaments made from animal bones and antlers, and delicate necklaces and bracelets crafted from shells. One particularly charming find comes from the Tagoya no Shell Miden in Akita Prefecture. A bracelet made from benkei clams found alongside unfinished pieces, suggesting it was crafted on site, maybe even as part of a little cottage industry. Were these items exchanged with other villages? Worn during festivals? Given as gifts? Very likely, yes. So, when we picture a Jomon village, we shouldn't imagine something harsh or primitive. These were places where people ate well, crafted beautiful things, buried their dead with care, and kept in touch with distant friends through trade and shared traditions. And here's something truly extraordinary. Unlike many other Neolithic societies, we find very little evidence of warfare or violence in Jomon settlements. Very few bones show injuries from weapons. It seems the Jomon people found a way to live in peace, sharing resources, roles, and knowledge without resorting to conflict. In a world where violence often defines ancient history, that quiet harmony might just be the most impressive legacy of all. When we talk about the Jomon culture, we mustn't overlook one of its most profound aspects. The spiritual world of the people, what they believed in, what they dreamed of, and how they expressed the invisible. Life in the Jomon era wasn't only about survival or utility. It was rich in faith, ritual, and artistic imagination. From countless excavation sites across Japan, archaeologists have uncovered objects whose purpose remains mysterious. Strange artifacts shaped like people, animals, or rods carved from stone. We call some of them sekibo, stone rods, thought to have had ritual or symbolic significance. But perhaps the most iconic among them are the dogu, or clay figurines. These small sculptures often represent female forms, with wide hips and round bodies, believed to symbolize fertility, motherhood, and the blessings of new life. Many researchers believe they were used in prayers for safe childbirth or bountiful harvests. One particularly famous example is the so-called shakoki dogu, or goggle-eyed figurine, discovered at the Kamegaoka site in Aomori Prefecture. With enormous, alien-like eyes, it sparked the imagination of people around the world. What did this figure truly represent? No one knows for sure. But one thing is clear. The people who made it possessed a rich symbolic mind and a reverence for something greater than themselves. In Akita, at the Isedotai site, dozens of thin, plank-shaped dogu have been discovered. These are believed to have been used during group rituals. In Iwate's Goshono site, clay objects thought to be figurines were found burned among stones carefully arranged in circles, suggesting ceremonial fire rituals. And then, there's something truly remarkable, the Jomon stone circles. These are large rings of standing stones, constructed during the late and final Jomon period. Some of the most spectacular examples can be found in the Tohoku region, such as the Ohyu stone circle in Akita, the Isedotai site, and Komakino site in Aomori. The Ohyu circle, for instance, is made of two concentric rings of carefully arranged stones. And here's something astonishing. On the summer solstice, the setting sun aligns perfectly between specific stones. Sound familiar? That's right, it's very much like England's Stonehenge, where the midsummer sun rises between ancient stones. It seems the Jomon people also track the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. These weren't mere calendars. There were sacred spaces. Places where people may have gathered to honor ancestors, give thanks to nature, or pray for successful hunts. Around the stone circles, archaeologists have found traces of bonfires, ritual tools, and offerings, all suggesting deeply meaningful ceremonies. And the spiritual expressions didn't stop there. In Hokkaido's Kyushu burial mounds, stone rods, believed to symbolize male power or fertility, were possibly raised skyward during ceremonies. In Aomori's Korekawa site, lacquered combs have been discovered, painted in vibrant red. These were likely not just grooming tools, but perhaps used as ritual adornments tied to identity or status. What emerges from all of this is a vivid picture. The Jomon people lived in dialogue with the unseen. They created art not just for decoration, but to connect with something sacred. They expressed thanks, hope, and reverence through festivals, what we call matsuri. Far from being primitive or purely functional, their lives were filled with meaning, rhythm, and ceremony. Today, when we visit these sites or hold a Jomon figurine in our hands, we are not just touching clay or stone. We are touching a spirit of gratitude, a timeless human need to believe, to hope, to celebrate life and death with grace. And perhaps that spirit is still whispering to us through the winds of Tohoku's forests and fields. Now, there's one more astonishing piece of evidence that shows just how advanced the Jomon people truly were. It's something that combines science, craftsmanship, and art. Something uniquely Japanese. I'm talking about urushi, Japanese lacquer. Urushi is a natural lacquer made from the sap of the urushi tree. But don't let the word natural fool you. This is no simple paint. To produce and apply lacquer properly, you need extraordinary skill. The sap must be carefully harvested, impurities removed, and the substance refined, then layered again and again, with each layer painstakingly dried under precise humidity. And yet, even as early as the early Jomon period, people had already mastered this process. At the Kamegaoka site in Aomori and the Korekawa site in Hachinohe, archaeologists have uncovered pottery and wooden items covered in brilliant red and jet black lacquer. Some even feature painted patterns, delicate designs laid over the smooth lacquered surface. It's breathtaking. These objects aren't just functional, they're beautiful. They blend utility with artistry in a way that feels timeless. Just imagine, thousands of years ago, long before Japan was Japan, the ancestors of this land were already laying the foundations of what we now recognize as Japanese aesthetic tradition. The culture of lacquer that began here lives on today in Aizu lacquerware, Wajima lacquerware, and other traditional crafts still practiced across Japan. And lacquer wasn't the only material they mastered. Another vital resource that supported Jomon life, both practically and symbolically, was wood, especially the Japanese chestnut tree, or kuri. Chestnut trees provided not only nutritious nuts but also hard, durable timber, perfect for building and everyday tools. Jomon people used it for pillars of their pit dwellings, digging sticks, trays, firewood, and more. It truly was a tree of blessings, feeding both body and shelter. Now, because wood naturally decays over time, we rarely find Jomon wooden artifacts. But in special anaerobic conditions, like those found in moist, waterlogged soil, these wooden treasures are sometimes beautifully preserved. One stunning example? The massive chestnut logs found at the Sannai Maruyama site in Aomori. These logs, over a meter in diameter, were used as structural pillars for the enormous six-post building we mentioned earlier. When you stand before one of these ancient timbers today, you can almost feel the presence of the forest and the ingenious hands that carved it with stone tools so long ago. Looking at all of these, the pottery, the lacquerware, the wooden buildings, the stone tools, and more, you begin to see a clear picture. The Jomon people were not just survivors. They were creators. They looked at the natural world not as something to conquer, but as something to live with, to learn from, and to express through art. They took earth and fire and made elegant vessels. They took stone and bone and forged sharp tools. They took wood and sap and created homes and beauty. In every part of their lives, we see a stunning harmony between function and form, between craft and spirit, between nature and art. A lifestyle where every object, every structure, every tool carried with it a touch of beauty, a whisper of nature's wisdom. This was the Jomon way of life. Now then, let's take a moment to bring the Jomon world into sharper focus. Instead of talking in general terms, let's spotlight actual archaeological sites that remain across the Tohoku region and southern Hokkaido. These are the places where the Jomon people truly lived, where their footsteps, tools, and prayers are still waiting quietly beneath the earth. Some of them are part of the UNESCO World Heritage Group of 17 Jomon sites, and each one gives us a deeper glimpse into this incredible prehistoric culture. Let's look at a few of the most iconic ones together. Sannai Maruyama site, Aomori Prefecture. Yes, this is the same site we mentioned earlier, one of the largest and most significant Jomon settlements ever discovered in Japan. Flourishing from the middle to late Jomon period, Sannai Maruyama gives us a vivid picture of long-term organized village life. Excavations have uncovered hundreds of pit dwellings, monumental buildings with massive chestnut pillars, and a huge variety of pottery, stone tools, and wooden artifacts. Perhaps most famous is the storage pit filled with chestnuts, proof that these people not only gathered food, but planned ahead and managed forest resources sustainably. Today, the site has reconstructed dwellings and raised floor buildings, allowing you to walk through a recreated Jomon village. Oyu Stone Circles, Akita Prefecture. Dating to the late Jomon period, Oyu features a grand double-ring stone circle. On the summer solstice, the sun sets directly between specific stones, a stunning cosmic alignment. It's easy to imagine the Jomon people standing there, watching the sun dip beyond the horizon, marking the passage of time and giving thanks to nature. Remains of fire pits and pottery fragments suggest rituals were held regularly here. This wasn't just a calendar, but a sacred space. Isedotai Site, Akita Prefecture. Another stunning ceremonial site with multiple beautifully arranged stone circles made from thousands of smooth river stones. These arrangements show a refined geometric sensibility, and the site has yielded many ritual artifacts, such as flat clay figurines and stone phallic symbols, hinting at its role as a major spiritual center. Kamegaoka Site, Aomori Prefecture. This late Jomon site is the birthplace of the famous Shakoki Dogu, or goggle-eyed Dogu, a mysterious, alien-like clay figurine that has captured imaginations worldwide. Kamegaoka is also known for sophisticated lacquerware, decorative pottery, and ornaments, revealing that even in the northern reaches of Japan, a rich artistic and spiritual culture was thriving while rice farming had just begun down south. Korekawa Site, Aomori Prefecture. Located in Hachinohe City, this site belongs to the same cultural sphere as Kamegaoka. Here, archaeologists found the national treasure, Gassho Dogu, a small clay figure with hands clasped in prayer and a gentle, almost humorous expression. It's less than 20 centimeters tall but radiates enormous emotional presence, a testament to the spiritual depth and creative sensitivity of Jomon belief. Korekawa also yielded elegant red-lacquered combs and wooden dishes, showing how daily life and beauty were deeply intertwined. Koshono Site, Iwate Prefecture. This large Middle Jomon village sits on a plateau surrounded by mountains. It's famous for its concentric stone formations, including the so-called stone sundial, a striking circular arrangement that may have been used for rituals tied to timekeeping or solar movement. In autumn, the surrounding forests blaze with red and yellow leaves. It's easy to imagine the Jomon people here too, living in harmony with the rhythms of the seasons. And these are just a few highlights. Across Tohoku and even into Hokkaido, you'll find many other fascinating sites. The Kakunoshima and Ofune sites in Hakodate, the Tagoyano Shell Mound in Aomori, Futatsumori Shell Mound and Chojagahara in Iwate, Omori Katsuyama in Akita. Too many to name. Each of these sites serves as a kind of time capsule, a quiet witness to a life once lived in balance with the land. Through these traces left in the soil, we can listen to the voices of our distant ancestors. So, if you ever have the chance, walk among the stones, stand in the dwellings, touch the earth, and let the Jomon whisper to you. Now that we've walked through the sights, the stories, and the spiritual world of the Jomon people, let's pause for a moment and ask the key question. Why was the Tohoku region and southern Hokkaido such a uniquely rich and important place during the Jomon period? Let me break it down into a few key points. First and foremost, nature. The cool temperate zone of Tohoku and southern Hokkaido offered an extraordinary natural bounty. Dense forests nurtured by a mild and humid climate, and a rich diversity of plants and animals. The mountains yielded chestnuts, walnuts, wild greens, and mushrooms. The rivers ran thick with salmon and trout. The ocean was a year-round pantry of shellfish and fish. And in winter, animals grew thick coats and fattened up, providing ideal targets for hunters. Because each season brought a different type of nourishment, people could live in rhythm with nature. They didn't need to urgently switch to rice farming. Nature already provided enough. Even when the climate shifted, the forest and sea remained reliable, helping the people adapt without collapsing. That's a rare thing in world history. This leads to the second point. Tohoku nurtured a unique cultural path, separate from the agricultural societies emerging in the south. While rice paddies spread through Kyushu and western Honshu during the Yayoi period, the north was still refining the hunter-gatherer lifestyle to an extraordinary degree. Take the Kamegaoka culture, for instance. Its bold, spiritual, and decorative styles blossomed even in the late Jomon period. Eventually, Tohoku did enter the Yayoi period, but it's fair to say that this region preserved a mature, sustainable, and spiritual version of non-farming society far longer than most places on Earth. In fact, few world civilizations can claim such long-term settlement without agriculture. And that's what makes Jomon Tohoku so remarkable. The third factor is geography. Tohoku and Hokkaido sit near the northeast edge of the Eurasian continent. The Sugaru Strait links Honshu and Hokkaido, and the broader climate bands align with those of Northeast Asia. In short, this area became a key node for movement, of people, of goods, of ideas. the obsidian trade routes, the jade ornaments from Niigata, all of these passed through or ended up in Jomon Tohoku. It wasn't isolated. Tohoku was a place of encounter and exchange, both within Japan and possibly across the Pacific Rim. A cultural network long before the word network existed. Lastly, I'd like to touch on the enduring influence of Jomon Tohoku on modern Japanese culture. Think about the reverence for nature, the ancestor worship, the seasonal rituals. These spiritual sensibilities echo through Shinto beliefs and folk customs today, especially in the mountains of Tohoku. It's not hard to imagine that the roots of these practices stretch all the way back to the Jomon period. And then there's the art. The bold shapes and symbolic patterns of Jomon pottery. Could it be that the aesthetic DNA of the Jomon people still flows through the brush strokes of Japanese calligraphy, the architecture of temples, the fabrics of kimono? When modern Japanese people feel a strange nostalgia toward traditional forms, perhaps it's the Jomon spirit whispering from within. There's something beautifully romantic about that idea, don't you think? And now, let's return to the present. Thousands of years have passed since the days of the Jomon people, but how are we, the people of today, receiving, preserving, and even reimagining their legacy? A world heritage of humanity. One of the biggest milestones, as we've mentioned earlier, came in July 2021 when the Jomon prehistoric sites in northern Japan were officially registered as a UNESCO World Cultural Heritage Site. This marked the very first time a prehistoric culture from Japan was given such recognition, a moment when the Jomon civilization was declared a part of humanity's shared heritage. The UNESCO committee praised the Jomon sites as exceptional evidence of a sedentary hunter-gatherer society that lasted over 10,000 years, and as an outstanding example of traditional land use adapted to changing climates. Everything we've explored so far, the sustainable lifestyle, the deep spirituality, the artistic excellence, was recognized as a form of outstanding universal value. Revival through museums and education. Following this recognition, awareness of the Jomon culture has been growing steadily in Japan. Archaeological sites across Tohoku have seen renovations and new visitor centers. At places like the Sanai Maruyama Jomon Jiyukan in Aomori, the Korekawa Jomon Museum in Hachinohe, and the Oyu Stone Circle Museum in Kazuno, Akita, visitors can explore excavated artifacts and hands-on experiences like pottery making and fire starting. School children in the region now have more opportunities to engage with the wisdom of their ancestors. These forms of education and tourism play a vital role in passing down the Jomon legacy to future generations. Modern creators inspired by ancient art. Interestingly, it's not just historians and archaeologists showing interest. Modern-day artists, designers, and architects are also drawing inspiration from the Jomon era. Ceramic artists create new works based on Jomon pottery designs. Fashion designers incorporate Dogu-inspired shapes and patterns into their clothing. Some architects even take hints from the structure of Jomon villages to design eco-conscious buildings. The Jomon way of life, harmonized with nature, is now seen as a model of sustainability in our current age of environmental crisis. In major cities like New York and Paris, exhibitions on Japanese culture often showcase Jomon pots and figurines, and visitors are stunned by how modern and exotic they look. Imagine an art lover in Paris flipping through a photo book of Dogu, whispering, "This looks like something from the future." Jomon-inspired pop culture and local revitalization. The influence of Jomon can even be seen in pop culture and regional tourism projects. In Aomori, there are Jomon-themed stamp rallies, and even restaurants recreating ancient dishes. In 2024, a snack company released scallop-flavored chips inspired by the shell middens of Jomon times, a playful nod to the ancient diet. These trends show that Jomon is no longer just history, it's becoming a source of excitement and creativity for modern people too. Challenges in preservation and new research frontiers. Of course, preserving these ancient sites isn't easy. Remains that are over 10,000 years old are incredibly fragile. That's why archaeologists use protective strategies like wooden walkways or even reburying excavated areas to shield them from erosion. At the same time, cutting-edge technologies like radiocarbon dating and DNA analysis are helping uncover new details about the lives and ancestry of Jomon people. Bit by bit, we are piecing together the true story of our distant ancestors. A legacy for the future. The Jomon legacy is very much alive. It's not trapped in textbooks, it's in conversation with the world around us. And the world is listening. From a lifestyle in tune with nature to a society that chose coexistence over conflict, to the profound beauty and spiritual depth that emerged from it all, the Jomon way of life offers us powerful insights as we seek a more sustainable future. It's no wonder the world is now turning to the Jomon period not just to understand the past, but to reimagine what lies ahead. And so, our long journey is coming to an end. Today, we've traveled far back in time to the ancient world of the Jomon period, and through this journey, we've discovered the wonders of Japan's Tohoku region, a land where the echoes of a 10,000-year culture still linger in the air. Let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned. Over 15,000 years ago, the Jomon culture was born in the Japanese archipelago. For more than 10 millennia, the people of this land thrived amidst rich forests and bountiful seas. They invented pottery, mastered the ways of hunting and gathering, built permanent villages, and traded goods with distant communities. They left behind symbols of their spirituality: dogu clay figurines, stone circles, and sacred burial grounds, all of which lay buried in the earth until they were rediscovered, whispering across time to tell us their story. And where do we find the greatest concentration of these messages from the past? Here in the northeast of Japan, in Tohoku, a true treasure trove of Jomon legacy. The UNESCO World Heritage Sites of Hokkaido and Northern Tohoku are vital keys to preserving this heritage. When you walk among the remains of a Jomon pit dwelling tucked in a quiet forest, or stand before a stone circle glowing in the sunset, you can feel time stretch, your imagination awakened by the presence of ancient lives. If you ever have the chance, I encourage you, come visit Tohoku. Breathe the same air the Jomon people once breathed. You might feel something stir within you. A sense of wonder, a strange and beautiful nostalgia you can't quite explain. For those listening from outside Japan, when you think of Japanese history, you might picture samurai, geisha, or ninja. But in truth, the Jomon era is one of the foundations of Japanese culture. And its spirit, respect for nature, strong community bonds, creative craftsmanship, and a deep love of peace and harmony, these are values that transcend time, language, and borders. Even today, the story of the Jomon people inspires us. It invites us to remember who we are, where we come from, and how we might live more wisely, together, with the earth. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I hope today's exploration has sparked your curiosity and brought you closer to this extraordinary and timeless culture. This has been The World Watches Jomon, a journey into Tohoku's prehistoric richness. Until we meet again on another journey into the past, take care and farewell with the eternal romance of Jomon in your heart.